Our guests today are Lily Brown, partner of WilmerHale here in Washington, D.C. Lily spent 14 years working at the SEC, senior special counsel to Corp Fin director Meredith Cross, and David Kanarek, who's vice president and group counsel in the general counsel's organization of American Express Company up in New York. I'm Brock Romanak. We're going to talk risk factors today on Zippy Point. So now, rapid fire succession, we're going to get into the do's and don'ts of risk factors. This is going to be exciting. And Lily's going to kick us off with some captions.
1, use captions that tell the story, the essence. You want to convey the essence of the risk to the reader. And this is actually required under 105 that you have a subcaption that adequately describes the risk. And you will get comments, or you may get comments if your caption does not tell the story.
Use plain English. Make the risks understandable to a reader and use examples. So this doesn't mean to be brief necessarily. The examples can expound a risk and make it more understandable for a reader.
3, order your risks in terms of risk magnitude. The SEC does not require companies to prioritize the order of their risk factors. However, companies typically do want to order their risks in terms of magnitude. And this makes sense in the light of the purpose of risk factors. Magnitude, just as a reminder, does not necessarily equal materiality. If you have remote probability of something happening, it may not appear high up in your priority list, even if it would be very, very significant if it did happen.
4, categorize by common themes. Now, this is basically a requirement with the new rule to include risk factor headings. But it also means that you should try to categorize your risks even within the headings. So if you have commonalities between risks, keep them grouped. And even if that does mean that you don't necessarily have everything ordered in risk magnitude, as Lily just said, at least it goes in a sequential order for the reader.
5, cross-reference if you can. While you will want to include the essence of the risk in the body of the risk factor disclosure, you can often pull in additional detail and background by cross-referencing to other parts of the document. For example, when discussing litigation-related risk, it may be useful to cross-reference to the legal proceedings section and/or your contingencies note to the financial statements. Or when describing risks that have actually occurred, have taken place, cross-referencing to a discussion of the event in MD&A may be useful. But it is important to keep in mind that you do still need to actually capture the essence of the risk in the risk factor, and you cannot just rely on the cross-reference.
Number 6, look at peers and other companies for disclosure ideas. Unless you have a peer that has a different fiscal year end than you do, or files their 10K significantly earlier than you, or updates all of their risk factors on a quarterly basis in their 10Qs, this may lead you on a 1-year lag. That's all you're doing. But it's a good sanity check. And in particular, think about running black lines so you can see how companies are changing their risk factors year after year to give you some disclosure ideas.
7, look at recent Corp Fin comment letters for ideas. As in so many other disclosure areas, it's useful to see what the SEC is focused on and commenting on in this space. So it could be specificity of the risk factor discussion. Has a hypothetical risk actually taken place? Is your header specific enough? Does it capture the risk? You can learn a lot by looking at what the staff is commenting on.
Hey, listen to your senior managers and others that are high up and see what risks they're describing. So you want to listen to any investor day presentations. If they're on your IR webpage, you can do that easily. Any other discussions of senior managers, perhaps at the board meetings. If you're not in those meetings, you want to check in with the folks that sit in those meetings to see what they've heard, and you want to train them to be your eyes and ears. So once a quarter, you might want to take someone from corporate communications, IR department, whoever's in those meetings, treat them to lunch and have them tell you what risks they're hearing.
9, involve the audit committee and risk or operations committee, if you have one, in the process. The full board will receive drafts of the Ks and will or should receive drafts of the Qs and earnings releases, and will have an opportunity to comment on the disclosures contained in those documents. And some companies will review their draft filings with their audit committee, either in connection with the quarterly audit committee meetings, quarterly disclosure team meetings, or otherwise, to walk them through what is new and has changed over the last quarter, including potentially discussion of changes in the risk factors.
And finally, 10, do everything you can do to get your business people to feed you information about the company's risks. This is really a summary of 8 and 9, but it really is so paramount. You do not want your risk factor section divorced from the reality within the company. Get time with your risks teams, talk with your business leads, finance colleagues, corporate planning colleagues. What's keeping them up at night? And make sure you're capturing that in the risk factor.
And now we'll move on to the don'ts, and Lily's going to kick us off.
1, don't rein in your captions to look like every other caption you've ever written. For this purpose, they very well might be a sentence or two. It's a summary, is the bottom line. So this is the flip side of the first do. You do need to be conveying the essence of the risk to the reader. And again, item 105 is looking for a subcaption that adequately describes the risk.
2, don't not include a risk just because that has a low probability. Inevitably, this is going to be the one thing that occurs, and you'll be grateful to have you've included.
3, don't rely on your business people to tell you what the company risks are. Affirmatively reach out to folks across the enterprise and ask probing questions. You are going to need lots of coordination and consultation between and among the disclosure committee, drafting teams, business folks, and executive team, with plenty of brainstorming. Don't wait for folks to come to you. Be affirmative in reaching out.
4, refrain from saying why it's not a risk. This is risk factor drafting 101. You will be sure to get an SEC comment if you try to provide some mitigating factors as to why it's not a risk. If you do have pressure from your business or your certifiers to say, this really seems pretty ugly, is there a way to bring it down a bit? Consider maybe using a cross-reference in your risk factor section to your risk management section, and maybe that could be a way to address the ways that the company is addressing those.
5, don't generalize the risk if it's happening already. So this is the no hypothetical risks warning. This is your big takeaway. You do not want your risk factors to sound hypothetical when in fact something is or has been happening. And again, the best example here is with cyber breaches where they have occurred or attempts have been made. Even if not material, you don't want to be saying that you may be subject to attempts. Probably everyone at this point is subject to attempts. So you can give a little bit of mitigating to say whether or not it's materially impacted you, but you absolutely don't want to say that something may be happening and it actually is or has been.
Number 6, do not keep the order of your risk factors the same in every disclosure. You need to reorder as risks rise and fall. The SEC decided not to mandate your ordering of risk factors in the most recent updates to the risk factor rules. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be going through, putting them into magnitude order and trying to highlight the most substantial risks at the very front.
7, don't be scared to include a macro risk. So on the one hand, you don't want to just simply cite a macro trend or event without tailoring it to the company. You need to show investors why it's particular and specific to your company, how that could be a risk for the company and for them in terms of their investment. But you are going to find instances. Again, the pandemic is a good example. We also saw it with the financial crisis where there are significant macro events that do need to be reflected in the risk factors. So the key here is to just do it in a way that's specific to your company.
Number 8, don't be scared to include general economic conditions risks. Just tailor it. Every company has exposure to the economy. Every company has competition, regulations that they have to contend with. The key with risk factor drafting is to make it tailored and provide examples as to where you and your company are particularly exposed. For general economic conditions, are there particular areas within the economy that you're particularly exposed to? Are there factors that you do look to, like unemployment rates, amounts of discretionary income, or trade issues that you are going to be particularly exposed to? And make sure that those are noted.
9, don't worry about how many risk factors you have. The goal is to capture the material risks and explain them in a way that conveys the risk to the reader. So you're looking for quality, specificity, not quantity. So you should not spend your time worrying about whether someone else has 45 and you have 30. You should be thinking about whether or not you have conveyed the risks for your particular company. Of course, with the SEC's changes to SK item 105, you do now have to worry about the length, but that's going in the other direction. So again, don't worry about whether you have enough in terms of quantity, numbers. Worry about whether or not they capture your risk.
And number 10, never kill a risk factor. So I say this with tongue in cheek because now we're with the new SEC rules. We're going to be considering maybe we should be killing some risk factors. But I've talked to a number of in-house folks that have been at their company for decades. And I asked them, have you ever killed a risk factor? And they thought about it and they said they didn't think so. In some cases, there was maybe a slow death where they would combine two risk factors into one so they would take out half a risk factor and tuck it into a prior one. But this is really going to be a hard exercise for a lot of people, particularly because we're disclosure lawyers. We think of these documents as compliance documents because they're protecting the company from liability. And so the last thing you want to do is take out a risk factor and actually have that event happen to your company where the risk factor would have protected you, and now you don't have that protection anymore. So good luck to everyone in their exercise. I am glad I am not in-house for that process. And thank you very much, David and Lily. This has been fun.
Thank you, Brock.